Hi, year 11s. My name is Mrs. George, and today I'm trying to read the text and analyze bits and pieces for you. Got no guarantee that I'll be reading the whole text, but I'm just going to try my best. If time permits, I will finish off the whole text, but if not, we'll try and do chapter by chapter. So today, when you look at the text, mainly, as I told you in the historical background, Night is a memoir, and it's written by Elie Wiesel, and it has got Nobel. It has won the Nobel Peace Prize, and it is really a good one. A slim volume of terrifying power. That's what the New York Times has described this book. So now I'm just skipping the first pages. Um, there is a translation, sorry, there is a preface to the new translation by Elie Wiesel. And again, I haven't got time to read the whole thing, but I will highlight some important paragraphs for you. So the important bit is on this page. It is obvious that war, which, give me a second, let me just take the highlighter. It is obvious that the war which Hitler and his accomplices waged war as a war not only against Jewish men, women, and children, but also against Jewish religion, Jewish culture, and Jewish tradition. Therefore, it's all about Jewish memory. And so it's a war waged against even Jewish memory. So keep that sentence in mind. Again, on next page, midway to that long paragraph, you could see that, oh, the discovery of a demented and glacial universe where to be inhuman was human, where disciplined, educated men in uniform came to kill. So I'm just highlighting the whole paragraph from until maybe there. So, and then I'll read it for you. Oh, the discovery of a demented and glacial universe where to be inhuman was human, where disciplined, educated men in uniform came to kill, and innocent children and weary old men came to die. Oh, the countless separations on a single fiery night, the tearing apart of entire families, entire communities, or incredibly, the vanishing of a beautiful, well behaved little Jewish girl with golden hair and a sad smile, murdered with her mother the very night of their arrival. So that's all about, that gives you an idea about what has actually happened during the Holocaust. Again, the wisdom of the elders understand what happened there. Would they be able to comprehend how, within the cursed universe, the masters tortured the weak? So that is what has actually happened. The masters tortured the weak and massacred the children, the sick, and the old. Skipping some and scrolling to the next page. Yes, I shall never forgive myself. Elie Wiesel says, I shall never forgive myself. And I'm just highlighting the whole paragraph. It's important. Nor shall I ever forgive the world for having pushed me against the wall, for having turned me into a stranger, for having awakened in me the basest, most primitive instincts. His last word had been my name, a summons, and I had not responded. So these are the words of his father, Elisa, Elisa, come, don't leave me alone. So that's what his. I'll read from that top part. My father no longer felt the club's blows. I did, and yet I did not react. See, their relationship actually changes. I let the SS beat my father. I left him alone in the clutches of death. Worse, I was angry with him for having been noisy, for having cried, and for provoking the wrath of the SS. We can actually see this incident in the memoir. And father just calls him, Elisa, Elisa, come, don't leave me alone. And then he says his voice had reached me from so far, from so close, but I had not moved. I shall never forgive myself. And for that, for not reacting, for his inaction, he says that I shall never forgive myself. Nor shall I ever forgive the world for having pushed me against the wall, for having turned me into a stranger, for having awakened in me the basest and most primitive instincts. His last word had been my name. His dad has been calling his name, Elisa, Elisa, and I had not responded. So that guilt is already in his mind. And again, there is a good sentence, a very important sentence here. The past seems to have been, the past, give me a second. The past seems to have been erased, relegated to oblivion. Again, the whole past, the memories of Jewish people, the whole past seems to have been erased, relegated to oblivion. And again, I'm skipping some. I'm just going to go to the next page. Last page. For the survivor who chooses to testify, I'm just highlighting the whole paragraph. For the survivor who chooses to testify, it is clear his duty is to bear witness for the dead and for the living. He has no right to deprive future generations of a past that belongs to a collective memory. To forget would be not only dangerous but offensive. To forget the dead would be akin to killing them a second time. So he is just talking about the importance of other people knowing this and understanding their life. And then there is a foreword written by Francois. So again, I haven't got time to read the whole thing, but there are some important sentences. I maintain this, therefore, this personal record, and I'm highlighting bits and pieces there. I maintain, therefore, that this personal record, coming as it does after so many others and describing an abomination such as we might have thought no longer had any secrets for us, is different, distinct, and unique nevertheless. The fate of the Jews of the small town in Transylvania, called Sayet, their blindness as they confronted a destiny from which they would have still had time to flee, the inconceivable passivity with which they surrendered to it, deaf to the warnings and pleas of a witness who, having escaped the massacre, relates to them what he has seen with his own eyes, but they refuse to believe him and call him a madman. So that you can see that in chapter 1. Again, there's another important. It is, however, another aspect of this extraordinary book that has held my attention. The child who tells her story here was one of God's chosen. He is a very faithful person, Elie Wiesel. So the child who tells us his story here was one of God's chosen. Again, that is really important. We could actually see the whole passage in the text. So I'm just highlighting that. And again, next page. For him, Nietzsche's cry articulated an almost physical reality. God is dead. So once he has gone through the Holocaust, we could see a change in his faith, Elie Wiesel's faith. So here he is just the person who has written the foreword is quoting Nietzsche. Nietzsche is actually a German philosopher. For him, Nietzsche's cry articulated an almost physical reality. God is dead, the God of love, of gentleness and consolation, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, had, under the watchful gaze of this child, vanquished forever into the smoke of the human holocaust demanded by the race, the most voracious of all idols. So it gives us a hint about how his faith has changed while he was in the concentration camp, but later how he held on to that faith throughout his life. All right, now that's all about the introduction. Now let us move into the chapter. So as you know, there is no chapter number, but I'm just going to call this as chapter 1. So the story starts like this. They call him Moshe the Beadle. So we are introduced to the character Moshe the Beadle. As if his entire life he had never had a surname. He was a jack of all trades in a Hasidic house of prayer. Hasidism is actually a Jewish religious group. The Jews of Sayet, the little town in Transylvania. So we know that the setting of this memoir is actually happening in Sayet, the little town in Transylvania. Where I spent my childhood, were fond of him. So people in Sayet were actually fond of Moshe the Beadle. Where I spent my childhood, were fond of him. He was poor and lived in utter penury. As a rule, our townspeople, while they did help the needy, did not particularly like them. Moshe the beadle was the exception. He stayed out of people's way. His presence bothered no one. He had mastered the art of rendering himself insignificant, invisible. Physically, he was as awkward as a clown. So there is a simile there. As awkward as a clown, especially when Elie Wiesel is describing Moshe the beadle. He uses a simile there. His waif-like shyness made people smile. As for me, I liked his wide, dreamy eyes gazing off into the distance. He spoke little. He sang, or rather he chanted, and the few snatches I caught here and there spoke of divine suffering, of the Shekinah in exile, where, according to Kabbalah, it awaits its redemption linked to that of man. I met him in 1941, so it is a story starts in 1941. I was almost 13. We know that Elisa is just 13 and deeply observant. By day, I studied Talmud. As I gave you in the introduction, Talmud, you know what Talmud is. I've already talked about that. By day I studied Talmud, and by night I would run to the synagogue to weep over the destruction of the temple. One day I asked my father to find me a master who could guide me in my studies of Kabbalah. You are too young for that. Maimonides tell us that one must be 30 before venturing into the world of mysticism, a world fraught with peril. First, you must study the basic subjects, those you are able to comprehend. My father, now we are getting an idea about his father. My father was a cultured man, rather unsentimental. He rarely displayed his feelings, not even within his family, and was more involved in the welfare of others than of his own kin. So he was like a protector. He takes care of others, and he is really concerned about the welfare of the other people. The Jewish community of Sight held him in high esteem. The Jewish community actually held him in high esteem. His advice on public and even private matters was frequently sought. Now, there were four of us children. Now, we're getting an idea about the family of Elisa. So, they were four. Hilda is the eldest. Bia and Elisa was the third and the only son, and the youngest one is Zipporah. So, we're getting an idea about the family of Elie Wiesel. They are four, and he is the only son. My parents ran a store, so they're running a shop, ran a store. Hilda and Bia helped with the work. As for me, my place was in the house of study, or so they said. There are no Kabbalists in Sayat, my father would often tell me. He wanted to drive the idea of studying Kabbalah from my mind. In vain. I succeeded on my own in finding a master for myself in the person of Moshe the beadle. So he started talking to Moshe the beadle, and for him, Moshe was like a master who actually he taught him about God and faith. He had watched me one day as I prayed at dusk. Why do you cry when you pray? He asked, as though he knew me well. I don't know, I answered, troubled. I had never asked that question myself. I cried because something inside me felt the need to cry. That was all I knew. Why do you pray? He asked for a moment. So there are so many questions. He is just posing some questions. Why did I pray? Strange question. Why did I live? Why did I breathe? So these are the questions about our identity. And he started thinking about all that. And these are all questions about identity, one's identity. I don't know, I told him, even more troubled and ill at ease. I don't know. From that day on, I saw him often. He explained to me with great emphasis that very question possessed a power that was lost in the answer. Man comes closer to God through the questions he asks him, he liked to say. Therein lies true dialogue. Man asks and God replies, but we don't understand his replies. We cannot understand them because they dwell in the depths of our soul and remain there until we die. The real answers, Elisa, you will find only within yourself. The real answer, Elisa, you will find only within yourself. That's what Moshe the Beadle says to him. The real answer you will find only within yourself. And why do you pray, Moshe? I asked him. I pray to the God within me for the strength to ask him the real questions. We spoke that way almost every evening, remaining in the synagogue long after all the faithful had gone, sitting in the semi-darkness where only a few half-burnt candles provided a flickering light. One evening I told him how unhappy I was not to be able to find inside a master to teach me the Sahar, the Kabbalistic works, the secrets of Jewish mysticism. He smiled indulgently. After a long silence, he said, there are 1,001 gates allowing entry into the orchard of mystical truth. Every human being has his own gate. He must not err and wish to enter the orchard through a gate other than his own. That would present a danger not only for the one entering, but also for those who are already inside. And Moshe the Beadle, the poorest of the poor of Side, spoke to me for hours on end about the Kabbalah's revelations and its mysteries. Thus began my initiation. So that's actually Moshe the Beadle is actually helping him to build his faith. Moshe actually helps him to build the faith. I don't know why it's not highlighting at times. I'm just annoyed. There we go. I don't know. Can't highlight it, guys. Thus began my initiation. Together we would read over and over again the same page of the Psalm, not to learn it by heart, but to discover within the very essence of divinity. So their main aim was to discover the aim of divinity, or the very essence of divinity. I can't just highlight that sentence. Okay, it's gone now. So, not to learn it by heart, but to discover within the very essence of divinity. So, he was actually a very faithful person and he wanted to know more about God, Eliezer. And so, actually, Moshe actually helped him a little bit with his faith. And in the course of those evenings, I became convinced that Moshe the Beadle would help me enter eternity into that time when question and answer would become one. And again, next page. And then one day, all foreign Jews are expelled from Side, and Moshe the Beadle was a foreigner. And then on, so the days passed like that, and one day, all foreign Jews were expelled from Side, and Moshe the Beadle was actually a foreigner. Crammed into cattle cars by the Hungarian police, they cried silently. So they have been taken away, especially Moshe the Beadle, because he was a foreigner and he has been crammed into cattle cars by the Hungarian police. They cried silently. Standing on the station platform, we too were crying. The train disappeared over the horizon. All that left was thick, dirty smoke. Behind me, someone said, sighing, "What do you expect? That's war." The deportees were quickly forgotten. People started, see, this is what happens in life. People will, if someone leaves our life, we quickly forgets them. So same way, the people inside, the deportees were quickly forgotten. A few days after they left, it was rumored that they were in Galicia working, and even that they were content with their fate. Days went by, then weeks and months. Life was normal again. It was rumored that they were in Galicia. A calm, reassuring wind blew through our homes. The shopkeepers were doing good business, the students lived among their books, and the children played in the streets. So that's the normal life inside. Beautiful, happy life. One day, as I was about to enter the synagogue, I saw Moshe the Beadle sitting on the bench near the entrance. So one day he saw, while he was about to enter the synagogue, Elie Wiesel saw Moshe the Beadle. He told me what happened to him and his companions. The train with the deportees had crossed the Hungarian border and once in Polish territory had been taken over by the Gestapo. Gestapo, as I told you, is the police, state German police. The train had stopped. The Jews were ordered to get off onto waiting trucks. The trucks headed toward a forest. There everybody was ordered to get out. They were forced to dig huge trenches. When they had finished their work, the men from the Gestapo began theirs. Without passion or haste, they shot their prisoners, whoever forced to approach the trench one by one and offer their necks. Infants were tossed into the air and used as targets for the machine guns. So you could see the brutality and violence. You could see the violence. Violence and brutality is a central theme throughout this text. So through the voice of Moshe, Moshe is trying to explain all this to Elie Wiesel. So this took place in Galician forest near Colme. How had he, Moshe the beadle, been able to escape? By a miracle. He was wounded in the leg and left for dead. So somehow Moshe the beadle escaped all this violence and brutality. He got shot on his leg, but somehow he escaped. He was left there for dead, but he escaped. Day after day, night after night, he went from one Jewish house to the next, telling his story, and that of Malka, the young girl who lay dying for 3 days, and that of Toby the tailor who begged to die before his sons were killed. Again, we could see the brutality. So he started saying all these stories. He wanted to say these stories of these brutal, inhuman brutality. He tried to say these stories to the people inside so that they will listen. But no one was actually ready to listen. Now Moshe was not the same after returning, after coming back. Moshe was not the same. So we could see a change in Moshe. Joy in his eyes is gone. So I'm just highlighting that whole paragraph, and you could say that it's all about change. There is a change happening in Moshe. Moshe was not the same. The joy in his eyes was gone. He no longer sang. He no longer mentioned either God or Kabbalah. He spoke only of what he had seen. But people not only refused to believe his tales, they refused even to listen. Some even insinuated that he only wanted their pity, that he was imagining things. Others flatly said that he had gone mad. So we could see a change in Moshe's life. And we could also see he's no longer talking about God. So we could see loss of faith. He lost his faith. Before he was talking about God and divinity. So there is a loss of faith that has happened to Moshe the beadle. And we could say that this loss of faith is actually foreshadowing, because we know that those who have already read the text know that Elie Wiesel will also lose his faith just like Moshe, even for some time. So it's like a bit of foreshadowing. Moshe's apparent lack of interest in religious discussion that actually foreshadows Elie Wiesel's own eventual loss of faith once he witnesses the Nazis' atrocities. So there is a little bit of foreshadowing happening. What do you mean by foreshadowing? Hinting about something that is going to happen later. So here we get a foreshadow. The loss of faith of Moshe, or Moshe's apparent lack of interest in religious discussion, actually foreshadows Elie Wiesel's own eventual loss of faith later on. As for Moshe, he wept and pleaded, Jews, listen to me. That's all I ask for you. No money, no pity, just listen to me. He kept shouting in synagogue between the prayer at dusk and the evening prayer. Even I did not believe him. I often sat with him, so no one believed. Even I did not believe him. That's what Elie says. Even I did not believe him. Even I did not believe him. I often sat with him after services and listened to his tales, trying to understand his grief, but all I felt was pity. No one thought that what Moshe says is true. They just ignored Moshe the beadle. And he says that, Elie Wiesel says that all I felt was pity. They think I'm mad, he whispered, and tears like drops of wax flow. And I'm just going to highlight the language techniques. He whispered, and tears. Give me a second, guys. Give me a second. Let me just change the color for you. Just picking a new color. Tears like drops of wax flowed from his eyes. So what technique is that? You could see simile there. So they think I'm mad, he whispered, and tears like drops of wax flowed from his eyes. So we could see the inaction of people. People is not ready to act. Moshe is coming and warning them, but people are enacting, or the inaction. Inaction is something that you could actually see in this in this memo later on as well. So inaction is another theme. Loss of faith is a theme. So make sure that you're noting down all these themes, because this will be really helpful for you when you actually discuss later on. So inaction, inaction. Once I asked him the question, why do you want people to believe you so much? In your place, I would not care whether they believe me or not. He closed his eyes as if to escape time. And then he said, "You don't understand," he said in despair. "You cannot understand. I was saved miraculously. I succeeded in coming back. Where did I get my strength? I wanted to return to sight to describe to you my death so that you might ready yourselves while there is still time." This is a very important sentence, because that was his hope. Moshe's hope was, I succeeded in coming back. Where did I get, what was his hope? I wanted to return to sight. I wanted to return to sight to describe to you my death so that you might ready yourself, so that you will be at least prepared while there is still time. Life, I no longer care to leave. I'm alone, but I wanted to come back to warn you. Only no one is listening to me. So again, we could see the inaction again there. His only aim is to come back and help the people inside, to tell them to get ready, but no one is even believing Moishe the Beadle. This was towards the end of 1942. Thereafter, life seemed normal once again. London radio, which we listened to every morning, announced encouraging news: the daily bombings of Germany and Stalingrad, the preparation of the Second Front. And so we, the Jews of Sight, waited for better days that surely were soon to come. I continued to devote myself to my studies, Talmud during the day and Kabbalah at night. My father took care of his business and the community. My grandfather came to spend Rosh Hashanah with us so as to attend the services of the celebrated Rebbe of Boshe. My mother was beginning to think it was high time to find an appropriate match for Hilda. Thus passed the year 1943. Now, spring 1944. Splendid news from the Russian front. There could no longer be any doubt. Germany would be defeated. It was only a matter of time, months or weeks perhaps. The trees were in bloom. It was a year like so many others, with its spring, its engagements, its weddings, and its birth. The people were saying, the Red Army is advancing with giant strides. Hitler will not be able to harm us even if he wants to. So people, you could see the optimism. People are hopeful. People are very optimistic. They were not ready to believe what Moshe the Beadle said, but they were trying to be optimistic. Yes, we even doubted his resolve to exterminate us, annihilate an entire people, wipe out a population dispersed throughout so many nations, so many millions of people. By what means? In the middle of 20th century. And that's exactly what they were thinking. How can someone wipe out an entire population in a 20th century, in the middle of 20th century? So many millions of people, how can they do that? So as a result, no one could trust that, no one could believe that Hitler could do something like that. And that's why they were optimistic, and that's why they didn't even listen to Moshe the Beadle. And thus my elders concerned themselves with all manner of things: strategy, diplomacy, politics, and Zionism, but not with their own fate. Even Moshe the Beadle had fallen silent. He also stopped warning them. He was weary of talking. He was really tired. He would drift through synagogue or through the streets, hunched over, eyes cast down, avoiding people's gaze. In those days, it was still possible to buy emigration certificate to Palestine. In those days, they could move to a different country. They could buy emigration certificate and they could move to Palestine. I had asked my father to sell everything, to liquidate everything, and to leave. "I'm too old, my son," he answered. "Too old to start a new life. Too old to start from scratch in some distant land." Budapest Radio, Budapest is actually Hungary's capital. Budapest Radio announced that the fascist party had seized power. The regent Miklos Horthy was forced to ask a leader of the pro-Nazi Nelius party to form a new government. Yet we were still Yet we still were not worried. Again, you could see their hope. Yet still we were not worried. They were not worried. They had hope. I don't know why that's happening. Sometimes it is still not worried. Sometimes it just stops highlighting. I don't know, guys. Of course, we had heard of the fasces, but it was all in abstract. It meant nothing more to us than a change of ministry. The next day brought really disquieting news. German troops had penetrated Hungarian territory with the government's approval. That was a very disquieting news. German troops had actually penetrated the Hungarian territory. Finally, people began to worry in earnest. One of my friends, Moishe, another Moishe, returned from the capital for Passover and told us the Jews of Budapest live in an atmosphere of fear and terror. Anti-Semitic acts takes place every day in the streets and on the trains. I told you about anti-Semitism when I told you the background information. Anti-Semitism or anti-Semitic means prejudice towards Jews or hatred towards Jews. The fascists attack Jewish stores, synagogues. The situation is becoming very serious. So they heard all this, that the situation is becoming really serious in different places. The news spread through sight like wildfire. Soon that was all people talked about, but not for long. Optimism soon revived. The Germans will not come this far. So again, even though they heard that something is happening in Budapest or Hungary, they still believed or they still hoped that it won't come to their place. The Germans will not come this far. That was the thought of people inside. They will stay in Budapest for strategic reasons, for political reasons. In less than 3 days, German army vehicles made their appearance on our streets. But within 3 days, in less than 3 days, German army vehicles made their appearance on our streets. So that is really important. So keep that in mind. Anquish, German soldiers, with their steel helmets and their death's head emblem. Still, our first impression of the Germans were rather reassuring again. Still, their hope, and they're still hoping that. Still, their first impression of the Germans were rather reassuring. The officers were billeted in private homes, even in Jewish homes. Their attitude towards their host was distant but polite. They never demanded the impossible, made no offensive remarks, and sometimes even smiled at the lady of the house. A German officer lodged in the Khan's house across the street from us. We were told he was a charming man, calm, likable, and polite. 3 days after he moved in, he brought Mrs. Khan a box of chocolates. The optimists were jubilant. Well, what did we tell you? You wouldn't believe us. There they are, your Germans. What do you say now? There is their famous cruelty. The Germans were already in our town. The fascists were already in power. The verdict was already out, and the Jews of the side were still smiling. That is a really important chord. So even after the Germans have approached them, even after the Germans are already in their town, the fascists, they were already in power and the verdict was already out, and still the Jews of side were still smiling. They had an optimism. They were really hopeful. You could see the repetition of the word already, already, already in power and already out. That 3 times, that repetition of that already is used to emphasize the optimism. Even after all that has happened, they were actually optimistic, and the Jews of side were actually still smiling. So that repetition is really important. Elie Wiesel wanted to stress the ignorance of people inside. The 8 days of Passover. The weather was sublime. My mother was busy in the kitchen. The synagogues were no longer open. People gathered in private homes. So, say the orders, they were lost, the synagogues were no longer open. People gathered in private rooms. No need to provoke the Germans. So, their intention was not to provoke Germans. Almost every rabbi's home became a house of prayer. We drank, we ate, we sang. The Bible commands us to rejoice during the 8 days of celebration. But our hearts were not in it. We wished the holiday would end so as not to have to pretend. On the 7th day of Passover, the curtain finally rose. The Germans arrested the leaders of the Jewish community. So on the 7th day of the first Passover, the curtain finally rose and the Germans arrested the leaders of the Jewish community. So that is the first arrest that is actually happening. From that moment on, everything happened very quickly. The race towards death had begun. The race towards death had begun. They started taking it a bit seriously now. First edict. Edict means like a formal proclamation, a formal authoritative proclamation, and then they started with proclamations, making some formal authoritative proclamation. And the first one was Jews were prohibited from leaving their house and their residences for 3 days under the penalty of death. Give me a second. I don't know what's happening. Well, I don't know why they're doing that to me. Give me a second. So Jews were, I don't know, I'm not able to highlight some phrases. I don't know why that is, but I wanted to highlight the whole phrase. That is the first edict, that is the first proclamation. Jews were prohibited from leaving their residences for 3 days under the penalty of death. Moshe the beadle came running to our house, and I warned you, he shouted, and left without waiting for a response. And now people started understanding this is what Moshe the beadle had warned them. The same day, the Hungarian police burst into every Jewish home in town. A Jew was henceforth forbidden to own jewelry. So, on the same day, there was another rule: all the Jews was henceforth forbidden to own gold, jewelry, or any valuables. Everything had to be everything had to be again penalty of death. I'm not able to yeah, everything had to be handed over to the authorities under penalty of death. My father went down to the cellar and buried our savings. As for my mother, she went on tending to the many chores in the house. Sometimes she would stop and gaze at us in silence. 3 days later, a new decree. Every Jew had to wear the yellow star. So third decree came, third proclamation came. Every Jew had to wear the yellow star. Some prominent members of the community came to consult with my father, who had connections at the upper levels of the Hungarian police. They wanted to know what he thought of the situation. My father's view was was that it was not all bleak, or perhaps he just did not want to discourage the others, to throw salt on their wounds. And what the response of the father was, the yellow star, so what? It's not lethal. So when other members started to ask, or when other members asked for his suggestion, what Elisa's father said is, what's the problem with wearing yellow star? So what? It's not lethal, it's not deadly. And there is something in bracket, poor father, of what then did you know? So he didn't know at that time that he is going to die because of the oppression of the German leaders. So it's more like a foreshadowing. It's like a foreshadowing because gives us a hint that he is later going to die through the oppression of the Hitler. So making them to wear the yellow star and all such kind of brutalities. So at that moment, he said to his colleagues, or he said to his friends, that yellow star. So what? It's not lethal. It's not deadly. Poor father, of what then did you die? But new edicts were already being issued. And what is a new edict? We no longer we no longer had the right to frequent restaurants or cafes, to travel by rail, to attend synagogue, to be on the street after 6 o'clock in the evening. And then came the ghettos. Two ghettos were created inside. Immediately after that, two ghettos were created inside. A large one in the center of the town occupied 4 streets, and another small one extended over several alleyways on the outskirts of the town. So two ghettos were already inside. The street we lived on, Serpent Street, was in first ghetto. We therefore could remain in our house. So that was the first. Elie Wiesel's house, the street we lived on, Serpent Street, was in the first ghetto. So we therefore could remain in our house. But as it occupied a corner, the windows facing the street outside the ghetto had to be sealed. So they had to seal the windows. We gave some of our rooms to relatives who had been driven out of their homes. Little by little, life turned to normal. The barbed wire that encircled us like a wall did not fill us with real fear. In fact, we felt this was not a bad thing. We were entirely among ourselves. And again, look at their hope. Even at that moment, in fact, we felt this was not a bad thing. We were entirely among ourselves. And he says that the barbed wire that encircled us like a wall did not fill us with fear, with real fear. In fact, we felt this was not a bad thing. They felt that this was not a bad thing. We were entirely among ourselves. So still they were hopeful. They couldn't even imagine that such kind of an atrocity will be happening to them in this era, in this world. A small Jewish republic, a Jewish council was appointed, as well as a Jewish police force, a welfare agency, a labor committee, a health agency, a whole governmental apparatus. People thought this was a good thing. Again, look at their optimism. People still thought this was a good thing. We could no longer have to look at all those hostile faces, endure those hate filled stares, no more fear, no more anguish. We would live among Jews, among brothers. That's what they thought. Of course, there still were unpleasant moments. Every day, the Germans came looking for men to load coal into the military trains. So that is a kind of another brutality, making them to work hard. Every day, the Germans came looking for men to load coal into the military trains. Most people thought that we would remain in the ghetto until the end of the war, until the arrival of the Red Army. Afterward, everything would be as before. The ghetto was ruled by neither German nor Jew, it was ruled by delusion. So that's also a bit important because the ghetto was, there was no one there. The ghetto was not ruled by, neither ruled by German nor Jew, it was ruled by delusion. So still people are having hope. They still believe that nothing is going to happen to them, that everything will be fine, that they will be in ghetto until the end of the war. That's what they were thinking. So it's more like their optimistic optimism and their hope and even their ignorance. Some 2 weeks before Shavuot, a sunny spring day, people strolled seemingly carefree through the crowded streets. They exchanged cheerful greetings. Children played games, rolling hazelnuts on the sidewalk. Some schoolmates and I were in Esther Malik's garden studying a Talmudic treatise. Night fell. So you have to look into the word night. Night is repeated a lot, and night, the word night, is actually symbolic. It is actually symbolic. It is symbolism, or it's symbolic, or it symbolizes darkness. It symbolizes darkness, not just the literal darkness, darkness in their lives. So night symbolizes darkness. Some 20 people had gathered in our courtyard. My father was sharing some anecdotes and holding forth on his opinion of the situation. He was a good storyteller. Suddenly the gate opened, and Stern, a former shopkeeper who now was a policeman, entered and took my father aside. Despite the growing darkness, I could see my father turn pale. What's wrong? We asked. I don't know. I have been summoned to a special meeting of the council. Something must have happened. The story he had interrupted would remain unfinished. I'm going right now, he said. I will return as soon as possible. I will tell you everything. Wait for me. We were ready to wait as long as necessary. The courtyard turned into something like an antechamber to an operating room. Again, that is another simile. I'm not writing it, you can write it. Something like an antechamber to an operating room, simile. We stood waiting for the door to open. Neighbors hearing the rumors had joined us. We stared at our watches. Time had slowed down. Another important word is time. Time here again is a motif. What do you mean by motif? Something that is repeated is called motif. A recurrent idea, repeated. A recurrent or repeated idea is called the motif. And here, time is of motif. We could see the time had slowed down. What was the meaning of such a long session? So time is not, it's not moving. It's as if it has slowed down. I have had a bad feeling, said my mother. This afternoon I saw new faces in the ghetto, 2 German officers. I believe they were Gestapo. As I told you, Gestapo is a German state police. Since we have been here, we have not seen a single officer. It was close to midnight. Nobody felt like going to sleep. Though some people briefly went to check on their homes, others left but asked to be called as soon as my father returned. At last the door opened and he appeared. His face was drained of color. He was quickly surrounded. Tell us what's happening. Say something. At that moment, we were so anxious to hear something encouraging. A few words telling us that there was nothing to worry about, that the meeting had been routine, just a few review of welfare and health problems. But one glance at my father's face left no doubt. The news is terrible, he said at last, and then one word, transports. What do you mean by transport? So they have to be transportation to another place, they have to leave their home and transporting to another place. The ghetto was to be liquidated entirely, so then they're going to knock off the ghetto and they have to move. Departures were to take place takes place street by street, state starting next day. We wanted to know everything, every detail. We were stunned, yet we wanted to fully absorb the bitter news. Where will they take us? That was secret. A secret for all, except one, the president of the Jewish Council. But he would not tell or could not tell. The Gestapo had threatened to shoot him if he had talked. There are rumors, my father said, his voice breaking, that we are being taken somewhere in Hungary to work in the brick factories. It seems that here we are too close to the front. After a moment's silence, again, silence is another word that you need to remember. After a moment's silence, he added, each of us will be allowed to bring his personal belonging, a backpack, some food, a few items of clothing, nothing else. Again, heavy silence. Go and awake the neighbors, said my father. They must be ready. The shadows around me roused themselves as if from a deep sleep and left silently in every direction. What language technique is that? It is personification. Personification giving human quality to an inanimate thing. We know that the shadows cannot rise, but he says the shadows aroused me. The shadows are waking. The shadows aroused themselves as if from a deep sleep and left silently in every direction. So personification. For a moment, we remained alone. Suddenly, Beta Wright, a relative who lived with us, entered the room. Someone is knocking at the sealed window, the one that faces outside. It was only after the war that I found out who had knocked that night. It was an inspector of the Hungarian police, a friend of my father's. Before we entered the ghetto, he had told us, don't worry, I will warn you if there is danger. Had he been able to speak to us that night, we might still have been able to flee. But by the time we succeeded in opening the window, it was too late. There was nobody outside. Now, again, the ghetto was awake. Again, another personification. One after the other, the lights were going on behind the windows. I went into the house of one of my father's friends. I walked the head of the household, a man with a grey beard and the gaze of a dreamer. His back was hunched over from untold nights spent studying. Get up, sir, get up. You must ready yourself for the journey. Tomorrow you will be expelled. You and your family. You and all the other Jews. Where to? Please don't ask me, sir. Don't ask questions. God alone can answer you. For heaven's sake, get up. He had no idea what I was talking about. He probably thought I had lost my mind. What are you saying? Get ready for the journey? What journey? Why? What's happening? Have you gone mad? Half asleep, he was staring at me, his eyes filled with terror, as though he expected me to burst out laughing and tell him to go back to bed, to sleep, to dream that nothing had happened. It was all in jest. My throat was dry, and the words were choking me. Another personification, paralyzing my lips. Personification again. Personification. The words were choking me. We know that the words can't choke. So personification, paralyzing my lips. At last he understood. He got out of bed and began to dress automatically. Then he went over to the bed where his wife lay sleeping and with infinite tenderness touched her forehead. She opened her eyes, and it seemed to me that a smile crossed her lips. Then he went to wake his two children. They woke with a start, torn from their dreams. I fled. Time went by quickly. Again, time is moving quickly now. It was already 4 o'clock in the morning. My father was running right and left, exhausted, consoling friends, checking the Jewish council just in case the order has been rescinded. Rescind. Rescind means cancelled officially. To the last moment, people clung to hope. So even to that last minute, people clung on to hope. The women were boiling eggs, roasting meat, preparing cakes, sewing backpacks. The children were wandering about aimlessly, not knowing um, what to do with themselves to stay out the way of the grown-ups. Our backyard looked like a marketplace. Again, another simile. Valuable objects, precious rugs, silver candlesticks, Bibles, and other ritual objects were strewn over the dusty grounds. Pitiful relics that seemed never to have had a home, all this under a magnificent blue sky. By 8 o'clock in the morning, weariness had settled into our veins, our limbs, our brains like molten lead. I was in the midst of prayer when suddenly there was shouting in the streets. I quickly unwound my phylacteries, phylacteries and ran to the window. Hungarian police had entered the ghetto and were yelling in the street nearby, "All Jews outside, hurry!" Again, racism, brutality. All Jews outside, hurry. They were followed by Jewish people who, their voices breaking, told us, "The time has come, you must leave all this." So the time has come, you must leave all this. You must leave all this. The Hungarian police used their rifle butts, their clubs, to indiscriminately strike old men, women, children, and cripples. Again, racism, inhumanity, a theme of racism, inhumanity, violence. One by one, the houses emptied and the streets filled with people carrying bundles. By 10 o'clock, everyone was outside. The police were taking roll calls once, twice, 20 times. The heat was oppressive. Sweat streamed from people's faces and bodies. Children were crying for water. Water. There was water close by inside the houses, the backyards, but it was forbidden to break rank. Water, mother, I'm thirsty. Some of the Jewish police surreptitiously means sneakily, went to fill a few jugs. My sisters and I were still allowed to move about as we were destined for the last convoy, and so we helped as best as we could. At last, at 1 o'clock in the afternoon came the signal to leave. There was joy, yes, joy. People must have thought there could be no greater torment in God's hell than that of being stranded here on the sidewalk among the bundles in the middle of the street under a blazing sun. So people were happy because they were so tired of waiting, and they thought that there is no greater torment than this. Again, that is a dramatic irony because we know that they will be undergoing lots and lots of torments after this, and they we could even say that this was one of the easiest of easiest of the torment that they had undergone. So the people doesn't know that at that moment. So it's more like a dramatic irony. We know it, but they don't know. Anything seemed preferable to that. They were so tired of it. Anything else seemed preferable to that. They began to walk without another glance at the abandoned streets, the dead empty houses, the gardens, the tombstones. On everyone's back there was a sack, in every eyes tears and distress. Slowly, heavily, the procession advanced towards the gate of the ghetto. And there I was on the sidewalk, watching them file past, unable to move. Here come the chief rabbi, hunched over, his face strange looking without a beard, a bundle on his back. His very presence in the procession was enough to make the scene seem surreal. It was like a page from a book, a historical novel. Again, another literary device, simile. It was like a page from a book, a historical novel perhaps, dealing with the captivity in Babylon or the Spanish Inquisition. They passed me by one after the other, my teachers, my friends, the others, some of whom I had once feared, some of whom I had found ridiculous, all those whose lives I had shared for years. There they went, defeated, their bundles, their lives in tow, having left behind their homes, their childhood. They passed me like beaten dogs. Again, simile. They passed me like beaten dogs. They passed me like dogs. With never a glance in my direction, they must have envied me. The procession disappeared around the corner. A few steps more, and they were beyond the ghetto walls. The street resembled fair ground Deserted fairgrounds deserted in haste, so the street was like a fairground which has been deserted in hurry. There was a little of everything: suitcases, briefcases, bags, knives, dishes, banknotes, all the things one planned to take along and finally left behind. They had ceased to matter. All those things had ceased to matter. Open rooms everywhere, gaping doors and windows looked out into the void. It all belonged to everyone, since it no longer belonged to anyone. It was there for the taking, an open tomb, a summer sun. We had spent the day without food, but we were not really hungry. We were exhausted. My father had accompanied the deportees as far as the ghetto's gate. They first had been herded through the main synagogue, where they were thoroughly searched to make sure they were not carrying away gold, silver, or any other valuables. There had been incidents of hysteria and harsh blows. When will it be our turn? I asked my father. The day after tomorrow, unless things work out, a miracle perhaps. Where were the people being taken? Did anyone know yet? No, the secret was well kept. Night had fallen. That evening we went to bed early. My father said, "Sleep peacefully, children. Nothing will happen until the day after tomorrow, Tuesday. Monday will be like a summer cloud, like a dream in the first hours of dawn." Simile. Intent on preparing our backpacks, on baking breads and cakes, we no longer thought about anything. The verdict had been delivered. That evening, our mother made us to go to bed early, to conserve our strength, she said. It was to be the last night spent in our house. I was up at dawn. I wanted to have a time to pray before leaving. That sentence is really important because that shows his faith. You could see his faith. My father had risen before all of us to seek information in town. He returned around 8 o'clock. Good news, we were not leaving town today. We were only moving to the small ghetto. That is where we were to wait for the last transport. We would be the last to leave. At 9 o'clock, the previous Sunday's scenes were repeated. Policemen wielding clubs and shouting, all Jews outside. We were ready. I went out first. I did not want to look at my parents' face. I did not want to break into tears. We remained sitting in the middle of the street, like the other 2 days earlier. The same hellish sun, the same thirst, only there was no one left to bring us water. I looked at my house in which I had spent years seeking my God, fasting to hasten the coming of Messiah, imagining that my life would be later, yet I felt little sadness. My mind was empty. So his faith again. You could see his faith. Get up, roll call. We stood, we were counted, we sat down, we got up again, over and over. We waited patiently, impatiently to be taken away. What were they waiting for? Finally, the order came: forward, march. My father was crying. It was the first time I saw him cry. I had never thought it possible. As for my mother, she was walking, her face a mask, without a word, deep in thought. I looked at my little sister, Zipporah. Zipporah is Eliezer's sister. Her blonde hair neatly combed, her red coat over her arm, a little girl of 7. She was only 7, a girl of 7. On her back, a bag too heavy for her. She was clenching her teeth. She already knew it was useless to complain. Here and there, the police were lashing out with their clubs faster. I had no strength left. The journey has just begun, and I already felt so weak. So, again, strength. All the strength is draining from his body. Faster, faster, move, you lazy good for nothings. The Hungarian police were screaming again. Racism, the theme of racism. You could use all those codes for racism. That was when I began to hate them. That code is important. That was when I began to hate them, and my hatred remains our only link today. They were our first oppressors. They were the first faces of hell and death. They ordered us to run. We began to run. Who would have thought they were so strong? From behind their windows, from behind their shutters, our fellow citizens watched as we passed. We finally arrived at our destination. Throwing down our bundles, we dropped to the ground. O God, Master of the universe, in your infinite compassion, have mercy on us. Again, calling God, again his faith. We could see Eliezer's faith. Theme of faith. The small ghetto. Only 3 days ago, people were living. So they have moved into a small ghetto now. They have they are in a small ghetto. People who owned the things we were using now, they had been expelled and we have already forgotten all about them. The chaos was even greater here than in the large ghetto. Its inhabitants evidently had been caught by surprise. I visited the rooms that had been occupied by my uncle Mental's family. On the table, a half finished bowl of soup, a platter of dough waiting to be baked. Everywhere on the floor there were books. Had my uncle meant to take them along? We settled in. What a word. We settled in. It was not even settling in, it was just a cramped place. I went looking for wood. My sisters lit a fire. Despite her fatigue, my mother began to prepare a meal. We cannot give up. We cannot give up, she kept repeating. Her strength and courage of mother, love and courage of of Elie Wiesel's mother. People's morale was not so bad. We were beginning to get used to the situation. There were those who even voiced optimism. The Germans were running out of time to expel us, they argued. Tragically, for those who had already been deported, it would be too late. As for us, chances were that we would be allowed to go on with our miserable little lives until the end of the war. The ghetto was not guarded. One could enter and leave as one pleased. Maria, our former maid, came to see us, sobbing. She begged us to come with her to the village where she had prepared a safe shelter. My father wouldn't hear of it. He told me and my big sisters, if you wish, go there. I stay here with your mother and the little one. Naturally, we refused to be separated. We could see the family love. They didn't want to separate. Family love and bond. Could see the family love and bond there. Night. No one was praying for the night to pass quickly. Again, night is written in capital letter. Darkness. No one was praying for the night to pass quickly. The stars were but sparks of the immense conflagration that was consuming us. There was nothing else to do but to go to bed in the beds of those who had moved on. We needed to rest to gather our strength. At daybreak, the gloom had lifted. The mood was more confident. There was those who said, "Who knows? They may be sending us away for our own good again." Their optimism. The front is getting closer. We shall soon hear the guns, and then surely the civilian population will be evacuated. They worry lest we join the partisans. I'm skipping some. This kind of talk that nobody believed helped pass the time. The few days we spent here went by pleasantly enough in relative calm. People rather got along. There no longer was any distinction between rich and poor, notables and the others. We were all people condemned to the same fate, still unknown. So they're all there's no differences among them. They're all the same. Saturday, the day of the rest, was the day chosen for our expulsion. The night before, we had sat down to the traditional Friday night meal. We had said the customary blessings over the bread and wine and swallowed the food in silence. We sensed that we were gathered around the familial table for the last time. So the family love. I spent that night going over memories and ideas and was unable to fall asleep. At dawn, we were in the street ready to leave. This time, there were no Hungarian police. It had been agreed that the Jewish Council would handle everything by itself. Our convoy headed towards the main synagogue. The town seemed desert, but behind the shutters, our friends of yesterday were probably waiting for the moment when they could loot our homes. The synagogue resembled a large railroad station, baggage and tears everywhere. The altar was shattered. So the synagogue, as I told you, it's a worshipping place. Altar was completely shattered. The wall coverings shattered. The walls themselves bare. There were so many of us. We could hardly breathe. The 24 hours we spent there were horrendous. The men were downstairs, the women upstairs. It was Saturday, the Sabbath, and it was as though we were there to attend services, forbidden to go outside. People relieved themselves in a corner. The next morning, we walked towards the station where a convoy of cattle cars was waiting. The Hungarian police made us climb in the cars, 80 persons in each one. They handed us some bread, a few pails of water. They checked the bars on the windows to make sure could that they would not come loose. The cars were sealed. One person was placed in charge of every car. If someone managed to escape, the person would be shot. Again, inhumanity, violence, brutality. Could see all that here. Two Gestapo officers strolled down the length of the platform. They were all smiles. All things considered, it had gone very smoothly. A prolonged whistle pierced the ear. The wheels began to, a prolonged whistle pierced the ear. The wheels began to grind. We were on our way. And that is the end of chapter 1. So I have read the whole chapter, lesson 1, and I have shown you how to identify the themes, how to identify the techniques, and what are the things that you need to highlight. So hopefully this analysis and this reading will help you with the rest of the chapters as well. If I get time, I'll do the rest, but if not, you will have to just try and do just like what I have done. Try and highlight it and try and connect some of the sentences to some themes, and make sure that you are updating your synopsis activity using this lecture. Okay, that's the end of chapter 1. See you with chapter 2 maybe.